is John Bryant, and I'm conducting a Veterans History Project interview for the Cincinnati-Hamilton County Public Library in Cincinnati, Ohio. And today I'm interviewing Bill Haines.
That's right.
Bill served in the U.S. Air Force during the Korean conflict. Bill, would you give me a little background information in terms of your early life and how you basically ended up in the Air Force?
All right. I am a Cincinnati boy. I went to St. John's out in Deer Park and played football as a freshman on the Deer Park team. And at that point in time, my folks moved to Madison, Indiana, and that's where I spent the next three and a half years going to high school at Madison. And then I came back to Cincinnati to attend Xavier University. But while I was down in Madison, Indiana, I did join the National Guard at the end of my sophomore year. I was 17, and my dad had to sign for me. And so I was in Battery C of an artillery unit, and I ended up becoming a chief of section of a 105 howitzer, and got quite experienced at that. But then when I came up to Xavier, I became inactive, and I did not go into the Xavier ROTC program, which, by the way, was a 105 howitzer unit, but I chose not to do that with having all the background that I already had, and not anticipating having to go in the draft.
What year did you go to Xavier?
At Xavier, I went there in 1949.
So this was before the outbreak of the Korean conflict?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Okay,
And so I was at Xavier, and it was in the fall of '51 that I got my draft notice, and I had a low number.
And at that point now, the Korean
War
conflict is
started.
underway, yes.
That's right. And so I was interested in the Air Force. I can't really say why, other than I had seen some pamphlets on this aviation cadet program. And so once I got that notice of draft, I decided to go down to the, talk to one of the recruiting men, and they said, yes, I could take the exam for the cadet program. So I went over to Rantoul, Illinois, at Chanute Field, I believe it was, or Rantoul Field, that's what it was. And I took the exam, passed it, and they allowed me to finish my junior year at Xavier, which was the spring of 1951. And I'm sorry, it was 1952 at that point, 1952. And I left for Ellington Air Force Base in June of 1952 for the cadet
did
program.
You have a commission at the time that you...
No.
Okay.
The cadet program, the first 6 weeks, I was the lowest thing on earth. I remember being called a gomer. I double-timed everywhere. The typical things that you've always heard about cadet training.
So you were put through the breaking-in period.
That's right. That's right. And I was there at Ellington from the summer of '52 until January of '53. And at that point in time, I had just learned basic navigation. We flew on C-47s. I don't know whether you're familiar,
yes.
but it's the old Goonie bird. It's probably one of the safest aircraft that there ever was. And I had an incident right off the bat flying in that thing. It was an indoctrination flight, and they were going up to 8,000, 9,000 feet, cutting the engine, dropping the plane, just doing anything to let you know what could happen at times. But the plane, as I say, was very safe. And in that process, the Durham hatch door came off. For some reason, it wasn't safety wired. And I happened to be right next to it, and fortunately we weren't pressurized, And so the only things that went out the window was a pair of dividers and a flight chart. But I remember that very vividly.
But that didn't dissuade you in any way.
No, I don't think I had an option. I was committed. So as I say, in January, they sent us, a majority of us went up to my cadet class, 5301. We went to Sheppard Air Force Base up in Wichita Falls. And we were basically flying B-25s, learning, as I recall, it was a Q-13 radar system. And there again, I'll give you a brief incident. One time we had a fire over the inverter, which was right above the bomb compartment in the center of the aircraft. And I smelled something like candy burning, and I got on the intercom, told the pilot that something's on fire up there because there's sparks shooting by. And long story short again, the inverter was on fire, and they gave us the 3 rings to prepare to bail. That's the closest I've ever come to bailing out. All I needed was one long shot and I'd have been out of there, but there was an alternate inverter and got the fire out. And so I proceeded on, and that's when I got, that's where I got my commission in April of 53.
53.
Yes. And at that time, there was a shortage of bombardiers. The war was still on at that point. And
What part of 53?
53.
The earlier part of 53.
Early part. This is like April of 53, because the war, basically, they agreed in July of 53, I think.
Right.
Yeah. And so they needed bombardiers. So I stayed at Wichita Falls for another 6 weeks and got checked out on the Norden bomb site. And at that point in time, I got reassigned to Randolph Field, where I was going to get crewed up on a B-29. But as you just mentioned, the Korean War came to a stop. And in the meantime, at that point, I flew home, married my bride there on the 18th of June. And she won't like this, but she was 18 and I was 21.
Oh, you were an older man.
I was an older man, yeah. I was her Prince Charming. But we got married, and that completed my first year. I had my commission, second lieutenant, and I guess I left one little bit out. We left there. We got married on a Thursday and had to be at Lowry Field on Sunday night. And that was, I guess, the 21st, something like that, of June of 53. And I was going through a 6-week gunnery course for the 50 millimeter guns on the B-29, because I would have been the nose gunner. And so that was a great assignment. Just being married, that was our honeymoon. We went to school in the morning. In the afternoons, we traveled all over and saw everything in the Denver area. And at this point in time, I had 6 or 7 classmates that have come the same trail as I had. So I had friends. Several of them had gone home and gotten married. So there was a group of us. And we enjoyed that 6 weeks. And then we went to Randolph Field and got crewed up. We were in the process of getting crewed up. Even had my orders cut to go to Yokota, Japan, and everything was canceled because of the cessation of the Korean War. And one little story that goes with this is at Randolph Field, we were getting indoctrinated to the B-29, and a lot of the pilots were recalled from World War II, and a number of them hadn't been behind the stick for a few years. So Randolph Field has parallel runways, and we were doing a racehorse pattern. Both fields active, going down doing touch and goes in a B-29. And my only duty was to make sure that we didn't run into another B-29 in midair, because they were having some midair collisions at that point in time. But we were doing racehorse patterns, flying around, coming around, landing, put the power to it, take it off. And that was a little dicey. That was, but it was fun. You know, at that age, you're so into spelling. You just don't think that anything will ever happen to you. So I guess maybe I should stop and give you a chance to ask a question. But
well, no, you're at Randolph. You've been trained now.
And by this time, it's the middle of August. We'd only been at Randolph 2-3 weeks, and everything was canceled, and I got assigned as a first navigator on a B-36 at Biggs Air Force Base in the 95th Bomb Wing in El Paso, Texas. I can remember going into the little cottage that we had rented and hadn't even opened all what little we did have, and we pulled out the map. We didn't have any idea where El Paso, Texas was from San Antonio. But as it turned out, it was 300-400 miles due west. And you may have been to Fort Bliss.
I've not been to Fort Bliss.
All right. Well, Fort Bliss was right across from Biggs Air Force Base. So that's how I ended up in B-36s. But the 95th was just beginning to form squadrons, and they had been assigned the B-36 aircraft. And my first exposure to a B-36 is when I reported to the base in late August. I guess it was early September, because I remember we had some leave. And the first aircraft had landed there, and a B-36 is monstrosity. It's 162 feet long, and the wings are 230 feet wide. And most of the landing strips at that time hadn't even been totally prepared for an aircraft like this. And the first one taxiing in cut short and got stuck in the mud. And here's a big crane pulling this lame duck out of the mud. And that was my first exposure to the B-36.
So the Korean conflict has, an armistice has been
signed at that point. So we're entering the Cold War era.
We're entering the Cold War era. We're also, the U.S. was just starting to send
warnings.
Sisters into Southeast Asia.
Yes.
Was there any talk at that? Because we may not have gotten to the Dien Bien Phu, was it in 1954, when the French were defeated in Southeast Asia, and then shortly after that the U.S. started to send sort of sisters into the area, but that was never a discussion as far as you were concerned.
That never came down to us. You know, the B-36 only had a 10-year lifespan. It started flying, there was a period of development, of course, but it basically went into service in 49, and it went out of service in 59. And my 4 years of service is 52 to 56. And so it was all related to the Cold War situation. And I wasn't at Biggs long enough to really even get crewed up. I got sent from Biggs. Let's see, we got to Biggs in the fall of 52, and we left Biggs in the spring of 50. I'm sorry, we got to Biggs in the fall of 53, and we left Biggs in March of 54. But I have to tell you, we were at Biggs in December of 53, and that's the day that a B-36 was being ferried down from Carswell Air Force Base, Convair, where the B-36 was built, and there was a crew of 9 men, and it was a freakish day in El Paso. It actually had snowed. We had ice, we had sun, we had wind. Just a very freak day, and for some reason, this B-36 got on the far side of the Franklin Range Mountains and flew into the side of the mountain. It was all overcast, and And for some miscommunication, it was coming in on final and flew right into that mountainside. And both the wife and I remember that very vividly because the next day, it was a typical beautiful day, and here's this big black mark on the mountainside, and 9 men lost their lives. And it just was, that's a memory, you just never forget that.
So where to from Biggs?
Well, from Biggs, I got assigned to a first observer training school out at Mather Field in Sacramento, California. It was a 6-month training program specifically for the position of observer on a B-36.
And exactly what is an observer?
Well, an observer, we always liked at that time to say it was a triple-headed monster. We were a navigator, a radar operator, and a bombardier. We could accomplish any one of those assignments. And on a B-36, a bomber crew, there was bombers and there were reconnaissance planes. But on the B-36 bomber, there was usually 15, 16 guys that were the crew. And I went through this navigation school, and that really prepared me for the remaining 2 years of my 4-year commitment. And so completing that course at Mather, sounds like I keep going one place to another, but we finally left there in the fall of '54 and got assigned to the 92nd Bomb Wing at Fairchild Air Force Base up in Spokane, Washington. And I was in the 327th Bomb Squadron, and I did get assigned to a B-36 crew, and my aircraft commander was a gentleman by the name, he was full Colonel Granville Wright. And Granny Wright was just, he was the ideal, typical Air Force cocked hat, know everything, very accomplished pilot. And he was only, I'm really guessing here, but he was probably in his mid-30s, 36, 37. But I felt very fortunate to be assigned to his crew. I had a first navigator whose name was Charlie D. Decker, and I had a radar operator that was called, was a Major Crisp. And anyhow, I flew with those fellows. We had only gotten 2 or 3 missions. You got to understand now, a B-36 is a very huge aircraft. It's very difficult to get it off the ground. The first 5 years of activity, they kept converting the B-30, changing it, redesigning it, and changing it. And so I flew, generally speaking, our missions were anywhere from 24 to 32 hours. And we had a 3 to 4 hour pre-flight, and then we had a 2 to 3 hour post-flight. So if I flew 30 hours, I pretty well committed 2 full days that I'd be gone. And we got in a routine of doing this, I'm going to say every 10, 12 days. We cycled. But I have something that I probably should finish here, is in the fall, it was like in December of '54, we just had a flight safety meeting, and Colonel Wright wanted to go fishing over in Seattle. And he and 2 other fellows, including our first engineer, got into a private aircraft, much smaller, and got caught in a downdraft going through the mountains over to Seattle, and they all 3 got killed. And so that was a tremendous loss. And remember that, Mary? Yeah. But anyhow, bad, tremendous loss. And so we got reassigned a new aircraft commander, and our crew became a select crew in SAC, which was
Strategic Air Command.
Strategic Air Command, General LeMay, yeah. And I'll give you a chance
well,
to
it
answer.
seems to me that you were sort of in the middle, because you were trained
Yes.
basically for combat, for fighting.
Well, that's the way it started,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
So then the Korean War ended. The armistice was signed.
Yeah.
So that there's a period
Right,
between that and the outbreak of the Vietnam conflict, which was in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
And so you're just in that window.
I was in that window.
In between.
that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And we no more got to Fairchild, and I was sent TDY, temporary duty,
Uh-huh.
down to Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that was to learn how to arm the Mark 17 bomb, because we could carry 2 of those on a B-30. The bomb weighed 21 ton, and we carried 2 of them. And went there for 3 weeks. Mary was expecting our first child, and I was very, we just had rented a house over in Airway Heights, which is right across from the base. And there's a little bit of a story that goes here. There was a Captain Potter, Francis Potter, who was a co-pilot at that point in time on a B-36, and he got assigned to the same course. Because the co-pilot, there was 3 pilots, the aircraft commander, the pilot, and the co-pilot. And there's a navigator, radar operator, and observer. So the low man on the pole, the observer, and the co-pilot had the assignment of learning how to arm this bomb, to put the plutonium inside the bomb to activate it if we ever got to that stage. And I met this Captain Potter, and fortunately his wife June looked after Mary while we were down there for 3 weeks. And they became very close friends, and maybe when we get towards the end of this, I'll close that story up because it ends beautifully.
Oh, okay, well, I'll reserve that.
Okay.
So you've been trained for all of these positions, but never had to actually use them in a combat situation.
You're absolutely right.
At this point, are you thinking about making this a career?
Absolutely.
Okay. So
Flying gets so ingrained in you, and it took all 16 of us to get that beast in the air. And we all had to do our job, and when we got it in the air, that plane, as I say, generally speaking, we were up there for 30 hours or plus. It's been known to fly in excess of 40 hours. It did not refuel. It had 23,000 gallons of fuel. That's equivalent to, if you see the tank cars go by on a railroad train, it's 4 or 5 of those cars full of fuel. And once we got to cruising altitude, we had 6 pusher-type Pratt & Whitney 4360 engines, and we had 2 J47s out on each end of the wing, so it was 10 engines. And once we got to cruising altitude, generally around 36,000 feet, going at an airspeed of around 230 mile per hour, a little less than 200 knots. And most of my missions were we'd fly for 8,000 miles. I just think of that. We'd take I'll give you a typical mission. We'd take off out of Spokane, maybe go over to Seattle, do some RBS runs, radar bomb scoring runs. We'd go down to Sacramento, hang around there for an hour or 2, do a day or night celestial going down, then go down to LA, hang around there for a while and do some practice, then go over maybe to St. Louis or Salt Lake, and then bring her home. And it just, I have an interesting statistic that I'm very proud of, and that's that 0.1% of the Air Force men that were flying only served on the B-36. There was only 385 of them. There's a little discussion about how many were built, but in the Magnesium Overcast, which is a Bible of the B-36 book that's been written, they have the history of 385 aircraft.
Now, were these the base, basically? And this was in Spokane, Washington. Were they sort of strategically located? Because if it's on the West Coast, it says, okay, we may be having problems with Russia. And so this is...
That's right. Many times, I shouldn't say many, though occasionally there'd be an alert called, and we'd have to go out and stay on the base 24, 48 hours, whatever the length was, prepared to take off. We knew where our where we were headed. We didn't know what our target was until we would reach the IP, but we knew kind of where we were going. And but fortunately, I never did leave the States. A lot of the fellows ended up going to Guam, but I kind of have a conclusion to this story that'll probably surprise everybody.
Okay.
But our crew became a select crew, and decided to take the 92nd Bomb Wing and convert them over to B-52s. And this was in the, this was in the spring of 1955. And our crew was one of the first crews selected to do this. And so we were going over to the altitude chamber, got assigned to go over there, and they wanted to send us up, as I recall, it was 65,000 feet in some kind of pressurized suit. And we were getting all ready to do that, the whole crew, and this was in preparation of training for the B-52. And somebody asked if we'd gotten our flight physical, and none of us had done that. And they wanted us to go to the flight surgeon, go through a complete flight physical, and get an EKG. Nobody ever heard what an EKG was in 1955. And so we did that. And I took that EKG, and a nurse come into the area sometime a few minutes after I'd taken that, and asked who Lieutenant Haines was, and that was me.
You raised your hand.
And I raised my hand, and I never flew, militarily speaking, again. I came up with a blockage in my heart. Today it's called a right bundle branch block. I still have it, but at that time they chose to ground me. And then they sent me down to Parks Air Force Base in California and put me through a number of tests. And I met the flight surgeon board, and they determined that I was not physically able to fly, qualified to fly. And so I got grounded permanently. And I went back to Biggs. By this time it's probably well into the fall of 55. And they reassigned me as the squadron adjutant of the 325th Bomb Wing under a gentleman that I thought very highly of, Colonel Sidney S. Pigeon. Sounds like a naval vessel. But he was a real good fella. And anyhow, I served as squadron adjutant, and all you are is a paper pusher there and making sure everybody's getting their shots and everybody's getting their pay and everybody's getting a sick call. And I did that for 4 or 5 months. And every time one of those beasts took off, it just, it ate away at me. And I finally went into Colonel Pigeon and I said, I got to either get back in the air or I got to get out. I can't take this. And I ended up getting retired in the spring of '56.
Okay.
And
And
so that pretty well
that
takes you
explains it.
through. Yeah, all that training, all those hours, I really don't know how many hours I flew, but I would say it's somewhere in the area of 700-800 hours somewhere. And
That's interesting.
yeah, it was very interesting. I can't say we had made up our mind, but we certainly enjoyed, look at the part of the country we had seen, and we had so many friends, and you become so close. And so anyhow, I got retired in April of 56, and I applied for some compensation, but they determined that I was born this way. This kind of defect normally doesn't show up in a gentleman, until in his late 40s, mid 40s. And that's all they could determine, is that I probably was born with it. Because I had played football, baseball, all those things that we all did back there. And to this day, every time I get an annual physical, and that sucker's still there. But I haven't never had any heart symptoms, no problems.
So then you returned to Xavier.
I got a job at GE Aircraft Engines, and went to night school for 3 years, 4 years, at Xavier, and got a degree in 1960 in accounting and economics, and I worked for GE for 37 years.
And GE had not been there all that long.
Well, it used to be the Wright plant.
Yeah, the Wright Aeronautical.
Yeah, my mom worked there as an inspector.
Oh, really? When it was Wright Aeronautical?
Well, it was Wright Aeronautical, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, she and during one of the strikes, when I got my commission in '53, in April of '53, my Aunt Aggie, who also worked there, Mom came down, and Mary came down, and were there for my graduation.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so you were at Wright for 37 years. For
GE
for 37.
GE for 37 years. The simplest way to say it, I was always in some kind of procurement related to both military and commercial engines. And the last 7 years of my career, I ended up as Vice President of International Licensing for aircraft engines. And I was actually working out of a GE RCA licensing organization, which was located in Princeton, New Jersey. That was my home base, but I never left Cincinnati. I had an office here because I was representing aircraft engines. And so I was very fortunate. Very great job, traveled all over.
So your Army career, not your Army, but your military career, just dovetailed nicely
That's
into
right.
what you...
Retired reserve. Yeah. And but you're saying it really did.
Yeah.
I was able to, I was familiar with flying. I had quite a technical background just from my military career, and that transferred right over into the aircraft engines. And I was fortunate. Brian Rowe, who became the CEO of aircraft engines, I worked with him on the vertical fan takeoff, vertical takeoff and lift aircraft, the Ryan aircraft, in 1956. I'm sorry, 1960 it was, 1960. And he had just come over from de Havilland, and I knew Brian real well then. He kind of went a little bit further than me, but once in a while he still recognized me when our paths would cross. So I've always felt good about that.
37 years, so that brings us to the mid-1990s, or around 2000, around that time is when you left.
I left GE in '93.
93.
Yeah, I got out in '56 and left in '93.
93.
June of '93.
but you still stayed active
Oh, yes,
in Air Force related
became a docent for the museum
museums.
there, up at Patterson.
Right.
Yeah, it's now the National Museum of the Air Force.
And so, how long did you do that?
4 to 5 years, 4 to 5 years, and I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that. And to finish the story on Captain Potter,
Okay.
it kind of ties in right here, is being a docent up there, I spent most of my time back in the Cold War hangar because they had a B-36 there, and I was able to help people understand what that aircraft was all about. And I became, I signed up to the Friends, which is a group of people that help support the museum, and get a quarterly magazine. And there was articles written in there, and one, I'm going to say it was 4 or 5 years ago. This is after I completed the docent experience, but I'm still a member. And I get this magazine, and I see some articles by a Colonel Potter. And I say, do you think that could be the same Colonel Potter? And we got on the phone, and he answered the phone. He still lived in Spokane. This is 50 years later. And Frank answered the phone. He goes by Francis also. And the same friendly voice, and I got married there. We're on a speakerphone, and I didn't know how to bring up his wife. And he says, hang on, and I'll get June, and we'll put her on. And so we talked for a while, and Mary and I jumped on a plane and went out and visited them. And it was a wonderful reunion. And here's this couple that we hadn't really talked to for that long a time. He eventually became the base commander of Fairchild Air Force Base, and he had 10,000 hours as a pilot, and spent a lot of that time in B-36s and B-52s. Became the base commander, and we visited him in Airway Heights, and we went out to the base, and they saluted him when we went through, and he said, sit in that back seat and just look important. Remember that, Mary? But I'm leaving one important part out, is that the wife went with me from the time I left, when we went to Denver. We went to Denver together, and she was with me throughout that period of time. I had 2 kids born in the base hospital out in Spokane.
And you now have 9.
We now have 9.
And how many grandkids?
We have 18 grandkids. Of our 9, 5 of them are over 50. And we just have a great family, and they're probably learning more about their dad right now than they ever knew. We have 6 boys and 3 girls.
Are they all over?
There is 2 of them are, one's in Houston, and go down there. The only thing left of Ellington is the landing strip for President Bush. And I have a boy in Denver. And we've tried to find Lowry Field, and there is a hangar there, and there's a museum. And but the others are all in the Westchester, Finneytown area. Excuse me, go ahead.
In terms of the airplanes and the Air Force, and what kinds of changes have you seen over the past 50 years? Does it stand out to you how much things have changed?
Oh, it's just changed. You know, I look at the 787 or the Dreamliner or the GE90 or the GE Gen X engine, and the amount of thrust that they have today compared to what we knew back then. And you know, I've been fortunate to take a tour of Boeing. I've also taken a tour of Airbus. I used to have the Airbus account, and during one phase of my work with GE, and those are tremendous facilities, and I know they're competition with one another, but I feel safe on any of them.
Because you didn't have computers when
We
you
didn't
were.
have computers. I spent a lot of time in contracts, and the closest I came to where they are today is I was able to transmit electronically, review a contract, send it over to one of the aircraft companies in Europe. I worked on what was called revenue sharing, and this is where when certain governments would want to buy our engines for their military aircraft, they wanted a piece of the pie, and we would license them to build some of the cold section and maybe a few of the turbine engine parts, but nothing in the high classified hot section, you know. But anyhow, I would be able to write a contract, transmit it to them during nighttime. They're 5-6 hours ahead of us. I'd come back in the morning and I'd have their position on the changes that I made, and that's the closest. And now today, most of my kids take their hand phone to bed with them, and I can't even have a conversation with them that they don't have that little black thing in their hand.
Instantaneous information and communication.
It's amazing. It's just unbelievable. And you know, I'm from the old school. I say, if you're going to talk to me, put that thing down and turn it off, and don't drive with it. So.
The other thing that means a great deal to you, as I've come to understand in your retirement, is your connection to the Musketeers.
Oh, I'm a great Xavier fan, yes. I didn't drive it down here, but I got a blue and white Mini with XU Mini as my license plate, thanks to my daughter.
And so do you go? Of course, they no longer have football teams.
They no
there.
longer have football.
But they did when
I
you
think
were
maybe I was at their last football game.
Okay.
But we became very interested in the basketball when Pete Gillen came. That's kind of when we started. It seems to me we started buying season tickets in '87, and we went to Milwaukee last year, and we went to Cleveland this year. And I don't know where the team went, but they sure didn't show up with Marquette.
but you still wear that big X.
Right.
And drive it proudly around
Oh,
Cincinnati.
I do. Invariably, I'll get a honk from a UC fan, and I think they're happy to see me, but sometimes I'm not too sure. Nobody's ever nudged me.
What question do you wish I had asked you that I did not?
A question that you wished you'd asked me?
Anything that you would like to add to it that we didn't get a chance to talk about?
Well, right now I'm kind of thinking we walked through it pretty fast, but there's something. I just signed up. I'm going to a reunion in Las Vegas in the week after Labor Day, and my son Jim and his grandson Jim are going with me, and it's for all the Air Force navigators and observers that went through cadet training at various fields. There was a number of places where this cadet training went. I happened to go to Ellington, and so I'm doing that this September, and I'm really looking forward to that.
I assume, just because I haven't heard the term mentioned, a cadet.
Yeah.
Other than at the U.S. Air Force Academy, but the kind of cadet program that you were in. Does it still exist?
It doesn't. No, there's no such thing as navigators anymore.
Right.
But there's a cadet program out at the Air Force Academy. Yeah, that still exists.
But for persons who are admitted to the academy.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. And you know, back at my point in time, I was hoping to become a pilot, but they had plenty of pilots, so the group I was in was sent to navigation school. And we were cadets for that 6 week, we were cadets for almost a year, but I was a Gomer that first 6 weeks. I remember the white glove inspections. I remember the dress parades on Saturday. That all gets in your, well, you know, you were in the Army, and it gets in your blood, and I still get excited on Veterans Day, and anytime I see an airplane fly.
There has been such, it seems to me, such a tremendous change
There is.
In our lifetime.
Look at this shuttle. Yeah. And even that goes back to the 60s. But my goodness, yeah.
Do you remember where you were? Because you would have just gotten out.
I remember when
Sputnik and all that was.
Oh, yes, yeah. I was in the upstairs of Building 100 when John Glenn went his 3 times around. I was there at the same place when Sheppard went up and came down. And I lived every moment with him. Yeah.
I guess the last thing that we should touch on, which is not related to the military, but GE.
Yes.
Is located within the Princeton School District. The Princeton School District essentially consisted of 5 villages. Woodlawn,
Glendale,
Sharonville, Evendale.
Yes.
And did I say Springdale?
Springdale, yeah.
There were 5 villages
different communities,
that had been put together to comprise the Princeton School District.
Yeah.
And GE was located within that district.
That's right.
And so therefore much of the financial support
comes from GE.
Comes from GE.
And,
but then Lincoln Heights, which was essentially an all African-American low-income community that was located just across the I-75 from GE. And so the state then said we need to
combine
those. And so you were involved in those negotiations and proceedings. You want to tell a little bit about that?
All right, I sure will. I'm very proud of that. We've lived in Sharonville since 1960, and we still live there today. We moved 10 years ago. Our daughter has our original house, and we bought a new home. I was 70, and I asked for 10 years, and I'll be 80 in a couple days here, and I'm asking for 10 more, you know. But yes, and I got a call from Dr. Lucas, who was the superintendent, and asked me if I knew Steve Hoffman. I said, well, I read his column and so forth. And he says, well, Steve just agreed to represent Sharonville, and I would like for you to be a representative on an advisory committee that's going to review and try to see if we can't work out this transition in an acceptable way and a peaceful way, and just make it happen. And I served on that advisory committee, and I met some wonderful people from all those communities that you spoke of, and it was a very, very difficult, challenging thing that we were trying to pull together, but it eventually worked, and it turned out to be very, very successful. And I've always had the highest regard for Princeton. With our 9 kids, 5 of them graduated from Princeton.
Oh, okay.
Check me on that, Mayor, but yeah, Jeannie did, that's 5. And we had 1 boy go to St. X, 2 boys went to Moeller, 1 of our girls went to Mount Notre Dame. 1 of our girls transferred from Notre Dame to Princeton, and the other 4 guys were musically inclined, and you know what the music program was out of Princeton with Miss Myers, and I'm trying to think of the band director's name, and I can't think of it right at the moment. Can you help me, Mary? Well, Mr. Reynolds, yeah. Okay. And Mr. Lucky and Mr. Williams, now they're all coming back. But We had 4 guys, 3 boys and a girl that all participated in those bands and orchestra and so forth. So yes, it's one of the best things that I can put my name to and claim that I'm really glad it turned out the way it did, and very successful.
All right, I think, and we've close to have used up the time that has been allotted to us. If there's anything else that we would like to add on as the tag in that might be of interest to your kids, we could do so. But otherwise,
Well,
if I've exhausted you,
I think I would say this, that I will concede that UC had the best basketball player in Oscar Robertson, but I'd say any given day, Xavier can give UC a real good run for their money.
that is fair. Clearly, Oscar is probably the best all around to have played the game of basketball.
And turned out to be a real asset to the community. Yeah.
And I suspect your kids, did Dave Plunkett's kids go to Princeton? Dave Plunkett was from Withrow and played at UC, but he had a couple of kids in that, and because Dave lives in the Sharonville area and now.
Yeah, I guess I'm not aware of that, but I was just trying to think. Think of the fellow that was the press secretary for the president, and gee whiz, was a Princeton graduate.
Oh.
And I'm sorry, his name but he just passed away. He was with.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah,
now.
isn't that sad that I can't think of his name? But he was a Princeton graduate. In fact, he was in Jeannie in one of my daughter's classes, as I recall.
Yeah, I can't remember the name, but now that you said he passed away.
Princeton's had some tremendous. I was just reading an article the other day about the 10 top students at Princeton and the different schools they're going to, and a real accomplishment. Great. Yeah.
Well, Mr. Haines, it has been my pleasure.
Well, it's my pleasure too, and I thank the library for giving me the opportunity to do this, and thank my wife for pushing me.
So you're the one that is really responsible for this.